no-fluff studios of Mastering Risk. I am your host, Dr. D, and today we are talking about 4 things you can do to protect your S&P when the world goes pear-shaped, when it all comes crashing down. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at it. Welcome back. Listen, today we are going to talk about the non-apocalyptic version of societal collapse. And what the heck does that mean? Well, that simply is there is a rational way in which your access to the world around you may be disrupted or significantly impaired, but it's not because society is collapsing. It's not because the aliens landed, and it's not because some miraculous thing has happened from some spot or some AI hacker. The whole point is you live, and your small, medium business, your solo entrepreneur, and a lot of our latest subscribers are new people who are thinking about becoming a solo entrepreneur, who are looking at that side hustle in the political, economic, and natural disaster space that we live in and saying, hey, this might be something for me. So today is all about the pitfalls, those things that can go wrong, how to understand them first, how to figure out your exposure, and then what specifically you can do to mitigate risk. We talk about risk all day here on Mastering Risk. You can't eliminate risk, and you can't prevent things from happening. The word prevention is a horrible word to use in risk management. It's all about mitigating. It means I'm exposed to something beyond my control, right? I don't control the world. Maybe I should. Probably you don't want me to. But you can't control the things that happen around you. They may be aggravating, cheesed off. The wrong politician is doing dumb things. Governments are doing ridiculously unintelligent policy. And we could go on about all of these things that are happening that are beyond your control. You're stuck in the middle of this. You need to operate. And if you're like me, you're a small business owner who's trying to grow your business, offering quality and honest products to individuals, but you have to do so in an environment that is unnecessarily, I would argue, chaotic and exceptionally difficult. So because of that, what we want to do today is outline how you can think about operating your business in the outside world. Now, we have all kinds of great products to help you at preparednesslabs.ca. If you drop over there, hit catalog, there's 18 or 19 items that are listed there. But what we want to make sure we offer you here on this podcast and the YouTube channel is the best free advice available. We don't want to hide things behind a paywall. We don't want to tell you just a little bit to get you interested and try to hook you and draw you in to pay me money. It's about giving you the best possible information that we know and that we're aware of, and a way to think about it that's free. Absolutely free. But trust me, when you go through these 4 steps that we're lining out here today, you will have an increased probability of less disruption. And when disruption does occur, because you can't get it to zero, the impact will be less. You'll have a strategy to navigate it. And there will be a higher, much higher probability that your business will be less impacted. And we're going to talk about your family at the end, because if you don't prepare your family for these type of events as well, what's the point, right? So the first thing is understanding how the world around you operates. If we think of it as a system, think about all of the things that you assumed would work this morning when you got up. So you woke up from a great or a bad night's slumber, whatever it was. You got up out of bed, you grabbed that cell phone, and you just assumed it would work. You assumed that there would be a cellular connection. You assumed that all of your apps and all of your feeds would work. You flicked the light switch on. You assumed the electricity was working. You went to the bathroom. You assumed the sewage system would be working. You went to the kitchen to fire up your gas stove. You assumed that that was working to make your morning coffee. Whatever it may be, if you just pause for a second and think about the totality of all of the systems in which we just blindly assume will be up and running, and will work without question every single day, you start to realize how many pieces of critical infrastructure, how many sectors of critical infrastructure you rely on to operate every day, and they're operated by a system that is totally outside your control, right? I run a 100% digital business. Everything I do is on the internet, and everything I do is over Zoom and other products such as that. I provide education through YouTube and other platforms, and there's all of these systems that are interconnected, but they absolutely rely on access to critical infrastructure that I don't control, right? I don't have my own cell network, right? I don't have my own internet service, and so I have to rely on products and services from other customers. So when we think about critical infrastructure, we categorize it, because otherwise there's thousands of systems out there. In Canada, where I'm based, there are 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. In the United States of America, the government refers to it as 16. In some areas, they're starting to be called, the nomenclature is changing, and they're using lifelines. So pick your poison, pick your name, pick 10 or 16. But here in Canada, we categorize them as your energy and utilities, your finance, food, government systems, healthcare, information and communications technology, manufacturing, safety, transportation, and water. So every system that exists in your modern technologically advanced society falls into one of these sectors of critical infrastructure. So if you just look through the lens of these 10, and I might say there's 10, Jeff, how about you do less? Well, this is a very well-organized and simplistic system. Look through the lens, look at everything around you through these 10 sectors of critical infrastructure, and it simplifies and greatly collapses the number of things that you're going to have to take some time to have a look at. Remember, this is free. It just takes time and effort. And if you think about, if you want a visualization, think about a table. Think about your dining room table or your kitchen or your dining room table. Underneath that are 10 legs. Each one of these legs represent a sector of critical infrastructure that holds society up. On top of the table is the city you live in, and all of the systems that are running 24 hours a day that you have absolutely nothing to do with, but you count on. When one of those goes down, when there is a failure of access, and we say failure of access because we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of who did what to whom or why. The best way to examine this as a small and medium business owner, a solo entrepreneur, or even a family person, is to look at it through the lens of, there are 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. What does my world look like when I no longer have access to one of those? We don't care why. We could go down 100 rabbit holes, from AI hackers to sunspots to everything else you could come up under the sun, and all of that is irrelevant, which is why throughout preparedness, I do not advocate for hazard-specific plans or all hazards approach. I think that stuff is junk. It's just a total, absolute waste of your time. So when you think about that, if you understand step one to getting a grasp on this and mitigating the risk to your business, your family, and your life, is to just understand the system in which you operate, or which you rely upon and in which you live. If you understand that these 10 sectors exist, if you see every system that you may have access to or use falls into one of these 10 sectors of critical infrastructure, then that's game changing, right? I've got 10 of them. I can grab my favorite whiteboard, my Hilroy scribbler, whatever it may be that you love to use, and write out the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. First step, just as I've listed them there, write them all out on a whiteboard. I'm looking up here at my whiteboard in the office. You put it up there and good to go, okay? Fabulous. Then what you want to do is determine your exposure to and reliance on. Now there's a couple of different lenses. The first thing we're going to look through is your business. So whether you're an employee, because this is just as important to do if you don't own a business, but you actually work at one, So if you're an employee, if you're a small or medium business owner, a solo entrepreneur, or you're somebody who is right at that precipice and you're excited and you're ready to jump into being an entrepreneur, but the risk is uncertain to you, then this is what you need to do. And it is a bit of a time-consuming exercise, but it's free of charge. You look at your 10 sectors of critical infrastructure and you jot down how you access those. Which ones do you need for your business to be functioning, right? Now, if you, for example, I run a digital product business. So on preparednesslabs.ca, we have a number of free products, but we have a number of products for sale. A couple of books that I've written are there as well. And so I need certain systems to operate for my business to be successful. For example, energy and utilities. Everything I do requires power. Absolutely everything. Without access to power, I can't create videos. I can't upload videos. Without power, I can't run computer systems and all of the background. The biggest piece of critical infrastructure is always going to be power, because many of the other sectors of critical infrastructure rely on power to be successful. The water system, for example, may have a backup, but eventually that backup fails, and without dedicated available power, the water pressure falls and municipal water goes away. All of these things require power. So if you think and you start at energy and utilities, I need power. Okay, so what does that mean? Just saying you need power, it means you want to rate these things in two ways. One, what's your dependent? I need 1,000 watts of power, whatever it may be, right? I need power. So then you got to rate it as, and this is your own perception. There's no better way to do this than do it yourself. Hiring a consultant is very dangerous to do this for you, only because you know your business better than anybody else. You know what you need. So think about whether this is low, medium, or high. And those have very clear definitions. So I want to be very careful about this. Low means it's acceptable, because there has to be acceptable risk. If you don't accept risk, you're not in business. You're not doing anything in business unless you accept risk. So low risk means if you lose access to this piece of critical infrastructure, life goes on, right? You can just live without it. It may be mildly disruptive, but you can live without it. Medium risk means it's uncomfortable. You'd prefer not to lose access to this critical infrastructure, but if it happens for 3 days or less, you know what? Life will be fine. You can figure it out. And the next step, we'll get to figuring that out. High risk means you actually need this to function. If you don't have access to this, your business doesn't function and you lose money every day. Energy and utilities for me is a high risk because of the type of product that I use. The same as if I looked at info and communication technology, the fact that I need access to the internet and cell phone networks, for those two pieces of critical infrastructure, for my business, it's a high risk. Finance is medium, right? It's uncomfortable if I lose access to QuickBooks and companies like that. It'll be fine. I can do my books in a week. Life will carry on. Probably low risk, maybe medium risk, depending on the type of business you're in. When I think about food for the business, it's low risk, right? I mean, for what I do in this business, losing access to the food system, the area of infrastructure that provides food, I'm fine. Government, we can joke about this all day. That is a low risk. If government goes away, I think we're probably happier than not, except for those that rely on it. It does include garbage collection and all that other stuff. But in the grand scheme, for me, that becomes low. Healthcare is low. Manufacturing is low. Safety is medium, because that's a little bit more important. Transportation is low, and water is low. So when you think about from how I run my business, how Preparedness Labs Incorporated is constructed, and how we provide digital services through this medium and many other, I really only have two high areas that I'm exposed to and dependency upon. So I understand how my business relies on all 10. I've rated them all low, medium to high. And now I've figured out there are a couple of high. Okay. I've got high levels of risk that I need to mitigate now so that when the bad day happens, because it will happen, sectors of critical infrastructure will go down, what can I do? And this is the third step. And what we refer to this is identifying how to replicate. And in my book and in many episodes that I've done in previous podcasts was about how do you define a prepper? And this is a name that comes up all the time. People have very loose definitions. I'm a scientist. I study human behavior in the preparedness field, and I've done so for well over a decade. The definition of a prepper is an individual who intentionally replicates a sector of critical infrastructure to be able to provide that for an extended period of time. You know, most people think about, 72-hour kits are going to be down for 72 hours. The data in North America, and I just have data for America and Canada, the data in North America clearly shows that 94% of sectors of critical infrastructure will be back up and running within 14 days of a significant disaster. Whether that be man-made disaster, a natural disaster, an enemy-caused disaster, that's it. 14 days. The other 6% represent catastrophic loss. If you think about the Moore, Oklahoma tornado, if your tornado goes through and takes out your water treatment plant, that's not coming back in 14 days. So the 6% are catastrophic losses, but 94% of the time, each one of these 10 sectors of critical infrastructure will be down for no more than 14 days. That's the data. What a prepper thinks about is beyond that for an extended period of time. They believe, for a whole series of reasons that's another podcast episode to get in, and they're not crazy, by the way. They're actually very intelligent. They look at these sectors of critical infrastructure. Preppers do the very same assessment I just went through, exposure to and reliance on a sector of critical infrastructure. Those that they rate as medium, but exceptionally, absolutely, all those they rated high, a prepper will create a system to replicate that, which means, for me, the power system goes down. Now, I know 94% of the time, the power will be back on in 14 days. My business does not operate without power. Full stop. Or without the internet, or without cell phone, right? So I need a way to replicate that. So I have power generation methods that allow my business to keep operating. So if this house didn't have any power, and if the office building didn't have any power, I could still produce these videos. I could work online. I could continue normal operations to the greatest extent possible, very, very close to perfect replication, by having my own power source. I've got lots of videos. There's 370 plus videos in the Library of Mastering Risk. Used to be called Inside My Canoe Head. There are all kinds of episodes in there, all about very detailed processes of replicating power systems. We're not going to get into how to generate power now. The whole point of this process is, if your business is like mine, and you own a business that relies on power, and you lose money every day you're not up and running, then it should be to me, it's a high risk, and therefore I have a system to replicate that. Cell phone and internet access is a different question. So what I have here in Canada is we have three main providers. There's about a dozen smaller providers, but they're all actually owned by one of the big three, Rogers, Bell, and TELUS. So I have my home internet on one company, and I have my cell phone network on another. So that if one of the big providers goes down, the odds are that I can't get the other ones. The other one will be up and running. And so I can replicate to the greatest extent possible business operations, because remember, this is about business operations, if one of the two big providers that I use goes down. The other methodology is we have an alternate access source to the internet. So I have a different way other than those two providers to access the internet through satellite. Some people use Starlink. There are other ways to do it. But I've built that replication. Now, does that cost me a bit of money? Yes. And actually, the third part of the replication does cost a bit of money. It doesn't need to be there. But for me, because that is such a high level of risk of not having access to the internet, I have 3 different systems that allow me to operate the internet. The odds of all 3 being down are not 0. Okay, it is possible that they all go down. And if they do, then that's the risk I have to accept. Because again, remember, I can't eliminate the risk of losing access to the internet. I can't make that 0. But I could have done a great deal of work to get it pretty darn close to 0. But yes, those 3 may go out. And if they go out, I'm offline. But then probably so are all of my customers too. So it's arguably maybe a moot point if it collapses to that specific amount. But those are things that I've done as somebody who looks at their small and medium business and wants to say, hey, this is a crazy political, economic, and natural environment. The decisions that are being made by politicians and groups around us are just undescribable in their lunacy. But that's fine, because I've taken the step to understand the system and how it works, the first step, the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. I've gone through a process of saying, hey, what is my exposure to and my dependency on the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure, and rating them low, medium, or high in a very basic system. And then what I've done is I've looked at the high and I've gone to the next step and said, okay, just like a prepper would, I have to replicate these sectors of critical infrastructure to the greatest extent possible, knowing it'll never get to 100, to be able to mitigate it. So I've taken the steps now. As the world gets crazy and keeps punching upside the head, I have a greater probability that my company will remain a going concern as these disruptions occur. Now, we've got a course called Mastering Risk. The course, it's available on preparednesslabs.ca. It's a course designed to demonstrate how to think about risk in your business. It talks about strategic risk, reputational risk, operational risk, and one of them that's critical, cyber risk. And it talks about how to lay out your business, how to map it out, how to visualize it, how to pick out the pain points, and how to come up with strategies for your business specifically. So if you want to go down that lane beyond what I've talked about today, that's over on our website at preparednesslabs.ca. So that's your business. But there's a fourth part to this. That's you and your family. Because one of the things that we often forget in business, and I talk about this at length, and even a couple of my last podcast episodes and the YouTube episodes were about that, was you're not any good to anybody else, to your family or your business, if you don't take care of yourself. I've talked about your financial, mental, and physical health, and doing the best you can to get those in the best possible shape you can, so that when the world does go pear-shaped, when the shizzy hits the fizzy, you'll be in a far better position. The same thing for your family. When we talk about preparedness, and I talk about it in the book up on our website, Preparedness Simplified Book 1, The Beginning, it talks about how to look at your family life through the very same lens of 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. So you got your business addressed, you've got a good strategy, you're well ahead of everybody else and your competitors in your business. I'm going to offer you that it's worth the time to go through the same process with your family. It's not difficult, it's free of charge, but it's a very methodical way. You don't miss anything. You look at those 10 sectors of critical infrastructure as we've laid them out, 16 in America, and you look at what is my family's dependency on and exposure to each of these sectors of critical infrastructure. And then you ask yourself the famous question, what does my world look like when I no longer have access to this? And I'll give a prime example why this is important, because everybody's different. If we look at the transportation sector of critical infrastructure, A lot of people dismiss that as manufacturing. They just say, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you rely on public transit to get to work and to earn an income, loss of access to public transit can be financially catastrophic for you and your family. But other people who sit back and take a car to work, it may not be, in their minds they may not think, but I remember the last bus strike here in Ottawa, when everybody who took the bus for work had no choice but to take their car, and it took me 3.5 hours to get to work in the morning. So yeah, it does affect everybody. Yes, the loss of access to the transportation system matters. Because, for example, if you take Uber to work, and I have a couple of colleagues who do this every day, it's actually cheaper for them. They don't own a car. They take Uber to work and home every day. Great. If there's no cell network, how do you get Uber? You now can't get to work your normal way, and you can't get home your normal way, and you can't check bus schedules. So good luck to you. If you haven't done any preparation, you now see that the transportation sector of critical infrastructure can impact how you do business. So don't rush through. Take the time to look at it and ask that question. What does my world look like when I no longer have access? And we phrase it that way because we don't want to go down the hazards. We don't want to go, in fact, we don't care the reason why the system's not available, right? We just know it's not available. So do you care why the power's out? No, you just care that the power's out. And it's a much simpler methodology to assess your risk level, and then you can decide what is low, medium, or high risk. Because again, everybody's risk tolerance is different. You may be somebody that just runs through life, doesn't care, you're confident, you'll deal with whatever happens. So you've got a really high risk tolerance. Or you might be somebody who a simple shopping trip is a methodologically planned evolution with steps that are clearly defined. Everybody's going to be somewhere on that spectrum from one end to the other. So you will go through that. We recommend that because then when you come out and you go through the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure for your family life, you come out with quite a number that are high. You take those highs, you set them aside, you put them on your whiteboard, you put them on your paper, and you sit down and say, okay, how do I pull the prepper routine? How do I replicate this to the greatest extent possible within the means that I have to mitigate that risk? Because remember, you don't get risk to zero, you get it pretty close to zero. And then if you do that for your family by a simple process that's absolutely free, takes maybe a half hour, 40 minutes of your day, you are now eons beyond all of your peers and your other family members and other business owners in your ability to navigate this incredible, disruptive, chaotic, uncertain time we live in. Hopefully these tips are really helpful for you. Make sure that you drop over to our website, www.preparednesslabs.ca. We've got a lot of free stuff there for you. All of the links are there. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. Stay safe.